How do great paintings pull your eyes in? We're gonna be talking about that in this video. My name is Rexel, professional concept artist and illustrator. We're going to talk about composition and how you can control contrast in your scenes to make better paintings. If you enjoy digital painting and would like to learn more, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to not miss any of my videos. Here I have a little document that will show how contrast works. So for this ball right here, we're gonna manipulate it and increase the contrast while this ball will stay the same. Now notice if I put in a brightness contrast adjustment layer, increase the contrast to 100, we can see that the ball gets darker and darker, and as well as the background gets a bit lighter. I'm not sure you can see that. So we can add another one, and here you can see it a bit more clearly. There's a clear dividing line between the two backgrounds, and another one and another one. So contrast happens when there's a large gap between the two values that are next to each other. This one is really dark, almost completely black, as you can see here, and this one is still at the mid-range, so not pure white. So if I use the levels here and put this in the middle, you'll see that the background will get brighter. If I put this handle to the middle as well, you'll see that the darker ball will get progressively darker. And if we put this right next to each other, we'll almost turn into complete white against complete black. This is contrast at its highest level, which we don't necessarily want. We want a good balance between low contrast areas and high contrast areas. For high contrast areas, we want to make sure that those areas are really important. Say this is a character or a specific focal point in the environment. And for low contrast areas, we want those to be less important areas. So the background or the environment or some secondary thing that's happening in the scene. If you have a dark character on dark background, contrast can't exist. And if you want to pull in the focus towards the character, you need to brighten whatever is on the background to create that contrast for him. And you can do this a number of different ways. One is adding some sort of organic thing behind it, say a cloud, which is really common in environment paintings. Now that I have added some clouds behind it, character stands out and it looks like the most important part of the painting because that's the part with the highest contrast. So let's get over some memes and do some sort of review, and we're gonna be dissecting not the memes but rather the paintings themselves, if it has some good composition, good color theory, things like that. So we're gonna be dissecting the painting, not the meme. Very gigantic image. Okay, so we actually have like a breakdown of this painting. So interestingly, we actually have a really strong start at the beginning. Like already this compositionally and like in terms of value structure, this painting is already complete, and you just need to refine those specific details and make sure everything makes sense, not just some sort of weird paint blobs. If you zoom out and like squint your eyes, you can almost tell that it's already a finished painting. So you can really tell that this guy is really professional. He knows what he's doing. So yeah, the details aren't really that present. He only implies those details with organic brushstrokes and smart use of organic shapes. And he didn't really particularly paint every single wave or every single rock. He more so used textures to his advantage. But yeah, compositionally, you can tell that this area right here is already the focal point. It has really strong contrast. The character is relatively dark against a relatively light background, and also there's a bunch of these guys over here, which is also a high contrast area of the scene, and they really stand out. But because of their scale, they don't cause too much attention to themselves. And because of this gigantic scale, but with a relatively with a really narrow value range and really low contrast, it kind of pulls attention to itself, but not too much. And this is kind of like the charm of the painting, because you need to make out the figure and like the monster first before you can actually realize, oh, there's this gigantic monster that's coming for this character. So yeah, really great use of contrast and composition. Also, he used like, rule of thirds over here. So there's that. And a bit of Dutch angle. But yeah, I'm not gonna, this might get like, restricted because of the content of the beams. So I'm just not gonna say anything about it. Unfortunately, I can't really, look at the source image for every one of these because they're so hard to search for, because they're really popular memes and they get bogged down by different search results. I must say I've seen the original of this, but I can't remember the particular artist. But if you can see the original, it has a lot of detail and looks really, really cool. If you look over here, the character is actually relatively dark. Like, the shape of the character is like that, right? But it's against this bright yellow background, so you can clearly see that this character is, a really strong focal point. And then over here, this character, it's the same. So actually, this is kind of a cheat that artists do, especially environment artists. They actually like make up stuff around that character just to make it pop. So if you can tell that like this character over here actually has a dark value, and it has a gradation from top to bottom. So what's supposed to happen is this is relatively bright and darker and darker and darker and darker and darker. But since the character over here is also relatively dark, that won't help the composition. So what the artist did is they made up some few dusty, bit like fog and like debris or smoke or whatever that is, just to make the character pop again, so that it has a bright background to be on top of, so that a dark character won't be on a dark background, just like the giant's leg over here that's really, really dark. So the character would have a tough time standing out. But with the debris and the smoke and everything, the character has a better chance of standing out from the background, which is really, really great. Also, really good meme. I think this is a more cropped version of the original, and because of the value groupings, it's more of this like entire shape or silhouette is combined into one unit, and it kind of reinforces the fact that they're together, or like she's being protected, and the general value range of the outside areas and as well as the people are relatively narrow and really low contrast. So they kind of distance themselves for being at the background, while the foreground is much darker and much more higher contrast. If you compare the darks over here, darks of the armor, the shield, and like its bright highlights, it has a much wider value range, while here the darks are only like this dark, and the brightest parts are over here. So not really that of a big value range. So that you can also use that the amount of contrast in each of the foreground or background elements can also solidify the composition even more. I think this one also comes from the same guy that did the giant, Jacob. So really, it has a really similar style as that one, and essentially the same principles and same rhythm apply, where there's a dark character in the foreground, really dark against a bright background, and there's a relatively low contrast monster out in the distance. Also, having a really narrow value range can also imply that there's a lot of fog and atmospheric perspective going on. So that kind of emphasizes the distance between them, that this character isn't near or is very far from the protagonist. The thing I don't particularly like about this is the difference in size between the protagonist and the monster isn't that big. So in terms of like compositional space, this character occupies this amount of space, well, this monster occupies that amount of space. But in the other one, the monster was much bigger, so it's not as threatening as the other one. I still do like that even though the horizon line is over here somewhere, the monster is actually kind of interrupting that. So instead of the horizon line being straight, it disrupts that silhouette because it's kind of popping outside of that horizon line, which is a nice touch. Meme wise, I can relate, so it's a good meme. This one, while the principles of the composition that I've taught is still being applied over here, other problems are more prominent over here, particularly the balance of contrast within the composition. So if you actually look over like any one particular area, there's a lot of fidelity and like small details or like small value changes that are really drastic, and it kind of pulls your eye away from the focal point. So if you actually look at here, that's a lot of detail, you know, for one area in the background, as well as this one. And there's lots of details over here on the other areas that aren't as important as the focal point, but is part of the focal point. So say the arm over here also has lots of value changes, you know, really sharp highlights. The fact that this is really detail dense downplays how important this area really is, because that's what we're supposed to look at. Not to bash the artist or anything, this is more of like an educational review of the internet art that's out there. But yeah, if I were this artist, I would reduce the amount of detail and fidelity on the other areas to help reinforce that you're supposed to look at this area, not everywhere else. And you can only do that by reducing the detail and reducing the contrast on those other areas. Yeah, this is more of like what not to do in terms of balancing contrast. But composition wise, this character is on the, you know, on the rule of thirds, really high contrast area, really saturated areas over here as well. And this one has the strongest highlights, I think. The picture, I guess this can count, but yeah, really strong highlights. And there's also some weird effect going on over here that's kind of like directional arrows that point you, hey, this is where you should look at. Still good use of composition. So yeah, this has been really fun, you know, just browsing and talking about memes and the art that the meme is related to. And yeah, let me know if you like this kind of format or more into structured lessons. So that's it for today's video. Leave a like, give your thoughts down here in the comment section. And thanks for watching.